The roar of the engines outside shook the walls of the diner, rattling the glass windows and freezing every breath in the room. The locals turned their heads toward the door, their laughter replaced by the kind of silence that only fear could bring. Rick's smirk faded. He looked from Eddie to the trembling waitress who had backed into a corner. Lena stood there, clutching her torn sleeve, her face pale but her eyes steady. She wasn't scared anymore, she knew what was coming. The diner lights flickered as the first Harley rolled up to the window, its chrome catching the neon glow like a flash of warning. The door flew open with a sharp clang. A dozen bikers stepped inside, their boots heavy, their jackets stitched with skulls, flames, and the unmistakable wings of the Hells Angels Nevada chapter. At the center of them was a tall man with a gray beard and cold blue eyes, Ryder, Lena's brother. He scanned the diner slowly, like a predator measuring every soul in the room. Who? He asked, his voice low, calm, but full of fire. Eddie didn't need to answer. Rick had already stepped back, stuttering, his earlier bravado slipping away like spilled beer on the floor. It was a misunderstanding, man, he tried to say, but Ryder's glare cut him short. The angels surrounded Rick and his crew. No one raised a hand, not yet, but the tension was electric. The sound of leather creaking and knuckles cracking filled the air. Ryder turned his eyes toward Lena, who hadn't moved since they arrived. She gave a small nod, her lips trembling. That was all he needed. Outside, Ryder said. His voice wasn't a shout, but it might as well have been thunder. Rick tried to talk his way out, saying he didn't know who she was, that he was just joking around, but two bikers grabbed him by the arms and dragged him toward the door. The rest of his buddies followed, pale and shaking. Eddie stayed still, arms folded, watching quietly. He wasn't part of the gang, but he understood their code: respect, loyalty, and payback when it was due. Lena walked toward him slowly. You didn't have to do that, she whispered, her voice soft but heavy with gratitude. Eddie shrugged. Some things you don't stand by and watch, he said. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I'll make sure my brother knows that. Outside, the growl of engines grew louder again, followed by the dull thud of something hitting gravel. No one inside dared to look, but they all knew Rick's lesson was being taught the hard way. When Ryder came back in, he wiped his hands on a napkin and nodded once to Eddie. It wasn't a thank you, it was an acknowledgement, a silent respect between two men who understood the weight of doing what's right. You travel light? Ryder asked. Eddie gave a small smile. Just me and the road. Ryder grinned slightly, then patted Eddie's shoulder. If you ever need the road to watch your back, tell him Ryder owes you one. With that, he turned, motioned for his crew, and one by one, the angels filed out into the night. The engines roared again, fading into the distance until all that was left was the hum of the jukebox and the quiet breath of relief from the diners. Lena looked at Eddie one last time. Thank you, she said softly. You just saved me from something worse. Eddie picked up his cap, set it on his head, and said, Nah, you were already saved. They just needed to be reminded who you are. Then he left a few bills on the counter, pushed open the diner door, and stepped back into the night, where the stars burned low, and the open road waited like an old friend. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly before Eddie, painted in golden rust by the evening sun. The road was silent except for the hum of his truck and the occasional cry of a distant hawk. Dust swirled behind his tires, catching the light like tiny sparks. He wasn't headed anywhere in particular, he never was. Ever since he left the city, his life had become a trail of small towns, gas stations, and the quiet satisfaction of fixing engines and helping strangers. There was something peaceful about living without roots, about knowing that wherever there was a broken machine or a lost soul, he could lend a hand and move on. As he rounded a bend, he saw something that made him tap the brakes. On the side of the road, under the shadow of a broken sign that read, Welcome to Red Mesa, sat a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her skin was sunburned, her dress torn, and her lips dry and cracked. She didn't even look up when his truck stopped. Eddie's chest tightened, the kind of ache that comes when you see something no child should go through. He grabbed his canteen, knelt beside her, and held it out. Easy now, he said gently. The girl took a sip, then another, her small hands trembling. Name's Eddie, he said softly. What's yours? Her voice was faint, barely a whisper. Nita. Eddie lifted her into his truck, turned on the AC, and drove to the nearest diner, a lonely building with peeling paint and a flickering, open, sign. The waitress gasped when she saw Nita and rushed to bring food. Eddie sat beside her, watching as she ate slowly, carefully, like she wasn't sure it would last. Between bites, she said her family had moved camps, and she'd gotten lost trying to find them. Eddie's heart sank. He called the sheriff, who said he'd reach out to nearby reservations, but Eddie didn't wait for thanks. He paid for her meal, left a few bills on the counter, and told the owner to make sure she was safe. Then, without leaving a name, he drove off into the sunset. Days passed. Eddie had returned to his small cabin near the edge of the desert, a place made of old wood, oil cans, and the smell of engine grease. He'd almost forgotten the incident, chalking it up as another quiet act of doing what's right. But on the fourth night, as the desert wind howled and coyotes sang in the distance, there was a soft knock at his door. Eddie opened it cautiously. Standing there were three Apache women, their faces calm but strong, dressed in traditional shawls. One of them held the little girl's hand. Without saying a word, the oldest woman stepped forward and extended a small hand-carved feather made of cedar wood. Her eyes glistened in the moonlight as she said, "You saved our blood. We repay our debts." Eddie was speechless. Before he could respond, another sound filled the air, the deep rumble of motorcycles approaching. Headlights cut through the desert darkness. From the shadows, a tall figure stepped forward, wearing a familiar leather jacket with the Hells Angels patch glinting faintly. It was Ryder, Lena's brother. He smiled faintly, his voice low and gravelly. "Word travels fast out here, brother. You stood up for my sister, and now you've saved one of theirs. Guess the desert decided we owe you twice." Eddie gave a small nod, humility etched into his rough features. Ryder revved his Harley once and said, "Not all angels have wings, man. Some ride steel." The women placed the wooden feather in Eddie's palm and stepped back into the night. One by one, the bikes roared to life, fading into the horizon like ghosts disappearing into the desert wind. Eddie stood there, the feather warm in his hand, the air thick with dust and gratitude. As he looked up at the starlit sky, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, belonging. In that silent desert, he realized that kindness didn't vanish, it echoed, finding its way back in unexpected ways. The road, the people, the stories, they were all connected, and sometimes
doing good was its own kind of freedom.